So, hello, Steven. It's an immense pleasure to meet you and to talk with you. I have to say that.
Oh, nice, man. I'm really happy to be here, Igor. I love doing these kinds of podcasts with sort of international people, not
Yes.
people here in America. So the idea that maybe my book gets out there into the rest of the world besides America, that's great, and speaking to you will help that to happen. So very happy to be here, bud.
Again, it's a big pleasure. So, I just need to introduce you for people who may not know you.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very familiar with your work. So, for all the people in the music industry, guitar players, and everybody who may be living under the rock for past few decades, so this gentleman is Steven Rosen, or Steve Rosen, and he's, I can say, one of the greatest rock journalists ever. And what's the most important, he's also a guitar player. He wrote, yeah, that's very important. Don't be humble. So he wrote over 700 articles, appearing in all major periodicals around the globe, US, Canada, Japan, Germany, France, England. His articles, you can find them in magazines like Rolling Stones, Los Angeles Times, Playboy, musician, guitar player, Guitar World, uh, Total Guitar. I'm going to probably forget some of them. There's probably a lot more of them. He interviewed, you know, everybody: Richie Blackmore, Jimmy Page, Steve Vai, Steve Winwood, Paul Gilbert, AC/DC, Aerosmith, Deep Purple, ZZ Top, Black Sabbath, just to name the few. There's, well, probably everybody, you know. And, he also has a very rare collection of audio interviews with over 1,000 hours of conversation with some of the biggest names in the industry. And believe it or not, he also wrote a few books, and some of the most notable ones are about Jeff Beck, Randy Rhoads, Black Sabbath, Prince, Bruce Springsteen, Free Bad Company, and Eddie Van Halen. And that's why we are here today. Well, Eddie Van Halen, probably the favorite guitar player of all of us guitar players. Guitar is guitarist, as they say. And Steven, do you mind me call you Steve or Steven? Sorry.
Steve is good. Thank you.
Okay. So
Kevin.
basically, what you documented is basically like your 26 years journey with Edward Van Halen. You were friends for 26 years, right?
Yeah,
You used to hang out in Hollywood Hills together.
that's right.
And this is not like a typical biography. It's like a very intimate and personal account of your friendship with Eddie Van Halen, as I understood.
Yes, no, that's correct. So, just a little bit of background here. So, I met Edward in July 1977. That is 8 months before the first album comes out. So when I met him, he was he was sort of a local Hollywood phenomenon. You know, his Van Halen had played at the Whiskey, they played at Starwood. Everybody knew who they were, but he was he was still kind of a local guitar player at that point, right?
Okay.
He
Yeah.
wasn't kind of, as you mentioned, Igor. He wasn't the guitarist
At
quite
that
yet
time. At that time,
at
right?
that time. It would happen in about 8 months when that first record came out. But when I met him, he was still, basically a local guy. And so we met that first night at the Whiskey, which is kind of a famous historic club in Hollywood on the Sunset Strip. And I was there to see Cheap Trick, who were recording a live record.
Okay.
As it turns out, Edward was a big Cheap Trick fan. He really liked Rick Nielsen's playing as well. And so I'm introduced to him, and we just start talking. We start talking about Eric Clapton, who was one of my favorite guitar players, Jeff Beck. We talked about Richie Blackmore, and we just had so much in common. But all this time, he's still just sort of this local guitar player. I didn't think much of it. I I knew that his band had gotten a big deal on Warner Brothers Records.
Okay.
So I would assume that, oh my God, this guy's got a deal on Warner Brothers Records. The band has to be incredible. He's got to be an amazing guitar player.
Yeah.
But, that's all I knew really. So we talk, and at the end of the conversation, he runs out of the room, and he comes back, and he's got a pen in his hand, and he picks up a piece of paper off the floor of the whiskey dressing room, which is where we were upstairs. And, he sits there, and he's writing something down, and he hands me a slip of paper, and it's his phone number. And he says, "Hey, man, I had a real good time, talking to you. Call me sometime."
Yeah.
I never did call him. I felt funny calling him. I don't know. That was a mistake. I wish I had called him early on. So that was sort of the start of this friendship that would last for 26 years. And as you mentioned, Igor, Edward lived in Coldwater Canyon, which was sort of the expensive part of the Hollywood Hills. I lived in Laurel Canyon, which is the very funky, cheap rent part of Hollywood Hills. Still an amazing place to live, And so we lived literally 8 minutes from each other. And it wasn't long before he would sort of just come over to the pad. He'd come over to my little guest house rental, and just want to hang out. Or, I'd call him, say, "Hey, man, what are you doing?" Or I'd drive over to his place, in Coldwater, where he lived with Valerie Bertinelli.
Yeah, true.
It was actually Valerie's house that Edward moved into. And I saw him go from this guy.
Local little kid guy, or yeah.
Exactly, a local kid playing at the whiskey in front of 200 people, which in and of itself was a cool thing, because the whiskey was sort of the top of the pyramid of all those clubs.
Yeah.
So if you're playing the whiskey, still you would risen to a certain
You're still
level.
on the top of some local food chain or something, right?
Exactly right. So I saw him go from there to going out on the road opening for Montrose and Journey in '78. By the end of that year, he had blown both bands off, and then opening for Black Sabbath in Europe, and then headlining his own tours. So by the second record, by the time Van Halen 2 came out, he was the guitarist's guitarist. He was already recognized, and rightly so.
Yeah.
So it was pretty amazing,
Exactly. No, it's fascinating. I mean, I envy you about that friendship, and I mean, whatever you. And I also have to mention, there's also an audiobook available, right?
Yeah.
And that's amazing, with so many hours of interview and talks with Eddie Van Halen on tape.
Right. So I stopped. My relationship with Edward ends in 2003, and I don't want to say precisely what happened. I want you to read the book. Seriously, it's I go into much more detail, but it ended.
Yeah.
17 years later, in 2020, I sit down to write this book.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, Igor. Let me back up real quickly.
Sure.
1986, I think Sammy Hagar had just joined the band. So they were arguably the biggest band in the world, right? They had come out with the 1984 record.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, he's, if not the biggest guitar player in the world, certainly one of two or three. And I thought, well, you know what? Writers are going to come to him, and they're going to want to write his life story. And I thought, I want to be that person. So after weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks of trying to build up the courage to ask him this question, I finally drive over to the 5150, the studio one day, in my head thinking, I'm going to ask him today. And I was worried about two things. One is that he was going to say no, which would have been disheartening, but hey, understandable. And the second thing was he was going to say yes, And now what the hell do I do? Now I got to write this freaking book about the greatest guitar player
Then
on the
you are in real problem. Then you are in real trouble.
exactly. So that book never happened, and I write about all of that in Tonechaser. So again, fast forward 17 years to 2020, I sit down to write a book, and I gather all of the interviews that I had done with him back in the day, and those became sort of the bits and pieces to jog my memory because you're talking about going back to 78 from 2020. That's like I can't do the math. It's like 48 years I've gone by, right? So yes. So as I'm listening to these interviews, which I haven't listened to probably since the day that I did them, I'm realizing, wow, there's some really remarkable stuff here. And some of those interviews I put up on my YouTube page, and you can hear some of that stuff, but a lot of it you've never heard.
Yeah, I know.
And now jumping ahead to answer your question, Igor, about the audiobook. So 14 months later, in October 2021, I finished the hardback. I finished writing that.
Okay.
The first edition comes out in 2022. We are now in the third edition. And I guess about a year ago, I thought about releasing an audiobook. I was a little reluctant because, one, I needed to find a narrator. So I listened to professional narrators reading audiobooks, and they were very professional, but what struck me is they sounded like robots. And they're reading these books and where it's supposed to be a little sad or mournful or it's like a happy part. And there's no difference in the inflection of their voices. So I thought, well, maybe I can read it, So I ultimately ended up narrating the book. And again, I was a little reluctant to read all of the interviews I'd done with him. So it was going to be my voice. So, Edward, when did you start playing guitar? Edward Van Halen. Well, I started playing when I was 12. I thought that's insanity. That sounds dumb just saying it out loud. So then I thought, well, what if I use the actual interviews? And that's why I was a little reluctant because a lot of these interviews had never been heard. And there were some very personal interviews in there. And even though I had written about them and sort of transcribed them in the book, it's different when you're hearing them.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And I was afraid to go there. I thought, it's too personal to me. I didn't really want people to hear that, But that's my little piece of my history, But at a point in time, I thought, you know what? I think people would love hearing the original audio.
Trust me, everybody wants to hear the original audio of Eddie talking about this and everything. Yes, exactly.
Yeah, man. So that audiobook came out, and it really is remarkable. And I don't think I've ever heard another audiobook put together that way, where the actual subject of the book, of the audiobook, uses the actual voices from that artist. It could be a musician or it could be an actor or a sports guy, So that's pretty amazing. And there's little bits in there where he's noodling on guitar that are, to my mind, those are worth the price of admission. There's, a couple little bits in there where I'm jamming with him.
Oh, man, that's mind-blowing, man.
That sounds. And then there was actually a second audiobook that came out at the beginning of this year that I call Van Halen's Voices. And those are sort of a lot of the interviews I did for what was going to be the authorized biography back in 1986. So there are interviews with Alex, with Michael Anthony, with Dave. There's a short interview with Gary Sharon, his guitar text. There's an interview, which is really amazing, with Kevin Hill, who is Edward's boyhood friend. They had this band. I think they're probably like 10 or 11. This band called Broken Combs. And they're like just little kids. So So there's some pretty amazing stuff in that audiobook as well. So what people have done is like they have the regular hardback, and then they'll kind of use that as sort of the text for the audiobook. We kind of listen to the audiobook and read along, So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I just also want to say, to people who is going to watch it, it's a really, really detailed and big book. It's like over 500 pages. I mean, I have
580 pages.
580. I have it in PDF, but maybe you have it here to show us if you have it by hand. If you don't,
hold on.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Here we have it.
So here it is, Tonechaser.
Tonechaser, and you can see
it's a
big book.
It's a big.
So you got to sit down and really take some time, And that was a concern when I'm writing it. So I start writing, and I'm like 250 pages in, which is about the length of most music biographies. And I'm like, I'm not even halfway done.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, oh my God, is anybody going to read that much? Do people read anymore? And I thought, yes, people must read. So I thought, hey, you know what? It's my book. I'm just gonna follow my nose, and if it turns out to be, 800 pages long, then that's what it is, and hopefully people.
I think really people would read it even if it's 800 pages or that, because Eddie Van Halen is one of these people in guitar player worlds that have this like almost cult around them. It's like a Jimi Hendrix, like David Gilmour. So anything about them, people are just gonna consume it. Anything, doesn't matter if it's a personal, if it's about how he approached to his sound, how he approached to his playing, what he eats for breakfast. He has this aura about him that literally people want to know everything about Eddie Van Halen. And since you have so many materials that are basically unavailable until now, you have so much this little stuff and intimate. It's mind blowing. I cannot wait to start reading it. You just sent it to me yesterday. When you get in contact with me, and I just have to say, again to the viewers, Steven Rosen is so big that when he sent me the email, I said, yeah, nice to meet you, but I don't believe it's really you. I kind of did. Sorry about that. I said, no, I think it's some scam. I think it's some, there's some attachment in the email. Somebody's gonna steal my data. No, I'm sorry. And then he said, no, it's me. And I was like, oh, okay. And then when we, scheduled this call, I said, oh shit, it's really him. So again, sorry about that. Really.
Yeah, man. No. As I mentioned before, it's truly a backhanded compliment, right? If some schmuck you never heard of, you're like, just want to delete the email.
I heard that. I saw a lot of your talks, on YouTube with Paul Gilbert. So many of these guys. So yeah, I know about it. I mean, I didn't know everything that you did, but I know a lot. So yeah, when you contact me, I thought like, no, it's not. It's some scam. So I'm glad it's not a scam. So.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, for example, if you need to, if somebody asks you who doesn't know anything about Eddie Van Halen, to describe him in few sentences about him, like about the person, how the person he was, like a friend, like just a regular person. How would you describe him, if that's possible, in few sentences, like in general?
That's a good question, man. I've never been asked that actually. He was a pretty complex person. He was like this onion, and you peel back layers, and there'd be another layer.
Okay, yeah.
And the longer I sort of knew him and hung out with him, I realized there were more facets to his personality. Music was first, foremost, and everything for him. I mean, I know you've heard it before, but with him, it was everything. There was never a single moment when I was with him that he truly did not have a guitar in his hand. So he'd come over to my iPad, and you mentioned I was a guitar player. not a very good one, but I always had a couple of guitars. So he'd come over. The first thing he did, he'd walk in the house, and either he had a cigarette that was lit, and that's the other thing that was always happening. He always had a cigarette in his hand,
Yeah.
which was, kind of a terrible habit. But hey, anyway, so he always had a cigarette in his hand. And so the first thing he'd do is he'd light a cigarette, he had a cigarette in his hand, he'd go over and pick up a guitar, stand, and he'd start noodling every single time. And whenever I went over to his place in Coldwater Canyon, and he was out in the studio, he was always sitting in the chair and had a guitar.
Yeah.
He was playing, he was changing strings. It was always about the guitar. Edward, there was two sort of major modes with Edward. It was the hanging out with my friend Edward, and there was Edward in musician mode.
Yeah.
He was in the musician mode, and he needed to work. He needed to, be by himself. It was almost an unspoken thing. I mean, I could see it. I could sense it, He'd kind of be playing, and he'd kind of look over. And I just knew. I said, hey, man, I'll see you later. So I was always aware of that. For Edward, respect was a huge thing. And if you disrespected him, he held on to that for a very long time.
Well, that's kind of understandable. Yeah, I can understand that.
Yeah, absolutely. And he showed you that respect in return. He was always so respectful of me. And I know I'm veering off the subject here a little bit, but what was really hard is that, yes, we were friends. We'd hang out and, bullshit and, do drugs. I got to say that,
Why not?
Hey, it was back in the day, and, and I hate to say this, man, it was fun.
Yeah.
Come on, man.
Of course it was. No doubt about it.
I can tell you that it was the worst thing I'd ever done, but it's a lie.
Yeah.
So, so we, be having fun, I'm sorry, man, I forgot what I was going to say about respect.
That if you disrespect him, that he hold a grudge for a long time.
Yeah, that's what it was. So we just start talking, and you start talking about the band, and this is pretty early on. Like around the second record, and he wasn't always happy with the band. And there were problems with Dave, and he'd talk about that. Yeah. There were problems with Michael, and he'd talk about that. Mm-hmm. That's what I was going to say. So here I am, his friend. I'm also a journalist. So sometimes we'd be talking, or we'd be doing an interview, and he'd say these things. He'd just be really honest about it. And he'd say, don't print that, right? And not that I ever would, which I never did. I never betrayed any of that trust, but he would say those things, or don't use that, So it was that fine line between being his friend, hanging out with him, being a journalist, and it was also recognizing, even as a friend, that you're sitting across the table from Edward Van Halen. This guy is changing the world of guitar. He goes out and plays in front of 50,000 people, and he sells millions of records, and he's married to this beautiful actress. And he's all those things, and it was hard to not go overboard and just be a psychopath and go, my God, Edward, the solo was amazing, and God, the record, and just just tried to be a normal friend around him. And there were a couple times that I write about it in the book where I kind of did go overboard. There was one solo that he did on the Fair Warning record, and I forget what it was. Just one of those amazing solos. I go, my God, that was Edward. It was incredible, you know. And he goes, yeah, you know, it was okay. Or he said something. He was almost offended that I said that, as if, and here's another personality trait. He was incredibly sure of who he was as a musician. He knew he was a very good guitar player, but he would never say, "Oh, Igor, man, you hear my solo on that record? It was fucking great, man. I kick ass solos."
Yeah, okay,
never talk like that, right? So when I said that, it was almost like I was demeaning his playing because I was sort of bringing it down to a level by saying, "Oh man, it was fucking great." You know what I mean? It's like he didn't need to hear it, and it couldn't be defined in just a couple of words. On the other side of that, and here's another facet of that personality. He would. I remember one time, and I forget what it was. It was a song that he was really happy with the way it turned out, and he played it for me, or he was playing the solo on maybe my guitar, not plugged in, which he would do a lot, which you can hear in the audiobook, and that stuff is amazing. He plays like a bunch of stuff in the second record. Oh my God, that's amazing, incredible. Thinking, don't go crazy. Don't say that's the most amazing thing you ever heard. Be cool about it. You know, he finished it, and I go, yeah, that's good. And then he says, you know, would you think it was really good yet? I thought it was neat. Neat was Edward's way of saying it's the best I can do, you know. So because I wasn't effusive, because I didn't go overboard saying how amazing it was, which was my first instinct, he had so much respect for me that he thought, well, if Steve doesn't like it, you know what I mean? So, and it's those little moments that really reveal so much about him that, in my mind, you know, which is why it took me 580 pages, because what I've sort of described to you in a few words takes a lot of words to describe, and I want you to understand what that was and how I was feeling and how he was feeling, and laying out that whole thing. And to me, the devil's in the details.
Exactly.
And so that's what you're reading. You know, all of those kind of those deep dives into those what I think were very special moments that revealed really who he was.
Yeah, and it's, you know, nobody did it until now. So basically, until your book, nobody had basically that much access of these little details. So that's really fascinating. It's going to be fascinating for most of the readers, I guess.
Yeah, exactly right. And there's some other very good books out there on Edward, you know, based around interviews that writers have done with him that talk essentially about his, you know, his music, his guitar playing.
Exactly.
And I did not want this to be that kind of a book. One, it had already been done by these other writers.
Exactly.
Two, right, I'd sort of done those kinds of interviews for the music magazines. So, as you said, you know, if I had to describe Edward Van Halen in 2 sentences, what would it be? Well, it took me 580 pages of sentences, but that's the kind of book I wanted to write. I wanted you to understand Edward, really.
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I mean, really, really fascinating. And what else I wanted to ask? I mean, I could now, we could talk now about Eddie probably for hours. Again, I mean, it's unbelievable. And I mean, it's also fascinating, you know, he was not only an amazing musician, amazing innovator in music, he was also amazing innovator in guitar gear, what he did, you know. He did his own guitars by himself, you know, switching tremolo, switching pickups, doing all this stuff by himself. And he didn't care, you know, if something doesn't look so neat, you know, as much, you know, as long as it's functional and works. And it's perfect example is his Frankenstrat, right? That, you know, but I mean, it also gets so much cult about it that now, you know, when you see this guitar, you know, without that neck pickup and with these wires, it looks beautiful. You know, if somebody else just did it, if you just did it like some guitar, somebody said, "What is this? This is just a mess," But when you see this guitar that long and when it has that much history, now
Yeah.
they're actually making basically their issues that looks exactly like that.
Yeah.
Like with the dummy neck pickup, without the neck pickup, with these wires, something long, and it looks amazing. It looks just beautiful.
Yeah. And if Edward had done nothing more than build his own guitar and put a humbucker in a Strat,
It
that would
would
have
be
been enough,
it would
right?
be enough. Yeah.
And in the book, I I was trying to think of what guitar players built guitars that they actually played, and I could only think of two people:
Yeah.
Les Paul
Yeah.
and Brian May. I'm not talking about guys who have signature guitars.
Yeah. 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 True. Yeah. I know that. Yeah.
There's Slash Les Pauls and Steve Vai. I've been, there's a lot of those, and those are great, But I can't think of any other guitar players, who built guitars that they also played.
True.
It's
True.
a pretty rare thing,
True.
And I would ask him about that. Well, man, isn't it hard, kind of putting a neck on the body and having it be aligned? Hey, just put it on. And with him, that's how he thought. Even
Yeah.
though he innately he had this woodworking, electrical sense. I mean, he
Yeah. Yeah.
understood, and putting in pickups, Remember, he said he put in pickups once and they all fell out because he didn't glue them in properly or something.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then, he'd saw off the end of the destroyer, He also
Yeah.
did it with an SG because he couldn't get up high enough on the neck, and by cutting it off with a piece of
Yeah.
wood
Yeah.
that
True.
big, you totally screw up the sound of the guitar. Um, but yeah, pretty remarkable guy.
Yeah. I mean, absolutely amazing. So what we're gonna do? Well, I'm gonna leave the links in description where all people watching this can buy the book, can purchase the book, purchase the audiobook. There's, if I understand, there's a few versions. It's now the third edition, right?
We're on the third edition,
Third
exactly.
edition,
The
and
difference between the third, I'm sorry, Igor. The difference between the third edition and the first edition, basically the text is pretty identical. By the third edition, I had done more sort of proofreading. I
yeah,
would see a word that was misspelled that would make me go
yeah,
insane. I mean, it was like a blemish on the Mona Lisa. Not that I'm comparing my book, but
exactly.
it made me crazy. So I tried to clean up, a
Hmm.
missing comma or something. The third edition obviously has different front cover, back cover, more photos, graphics are different, but the text is pretty identical in
Hmm.
the
Hmm.
three editions. So,
Okay, so I will leave the link in the description because I think we have like almost just 5 minutes left to this Zoom until this Zoom
ah,
stops. Yeah, it's
yeah,
sometime like 5 minutes, but still, I mean, again, I really envy you about your friendship with Eddie. And again, I mean, I cannot wait to start reading the book. You just sent it to me yesterday. So, yeah, I'm going to start literally tonight if I'm not here. It's already almost midnight at my place.
oh wow,
Yeah, it's in Europe here. But yeah, I cannot wait to read it, And again, I mean, I read a lot of, biographies, autobiographies, but I know that with all this description, everything, that this is going to be something else. So,
well, cool, man. I appreciate that. I wanna get your feedback
yeah,
when you start reading. I want to hear what you think.
absolutely.
And Igor, you're a pretty tremendous guitar player in your own right.
Well, thank you very much. I'm doing my best.
Yeah, man. I mean, you're not as good as me, but you keep practicing.
I'm doing that, and I mean, I don't see myself as good because the more I practice, the worse I feel about myself. I have feeling that I know less, and it's really a curse. It's a curse, really. The more you practice, you think you nailed something, great. You know how good, you think it's so good, and then after 1 day or 2 days, think, nah, it's everything is just shit. Nah, I just need to work more. So yeah, it's kind of a blessing and a curse, I guess. The
Yeah,
more
yeah.
you practice, the more. But I mean, I do okay, I guess.
You're
Eventually.
an incredibly good guitar player.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much, because I mean we need to wrap this up because this abruptly,
Yeah, yeah. No,
stopped us.
I got you.
So thank you so much. I'm gonna leave the links in the description for the purchase of books. I mean, so just one more info for people around the world. Is it is it available worldwide?
No, I send out all the books myself.
Okay, so it's
So
like okay,
if you're in Europe, um, shipping is a little expensive, but I'll do this. If you'll tell me when you want to get a book, you'll say that you saw me on Igor's show.
okay.
I will reduce the price of the book, which is normally $42, and I'll reduce the price of the book to $30 to try to give you a little wiggle room on the shipping because it is a little expensive. Because the
Nice.
book does weigh almost 4 pounds. So there you go.
It's worth at least 5 times that. So thank you very much. I'm gonna definitely mention that also in description.
Good.
And thank you. It was such a pleasure meeting you and talk with you. And I mean, we just peeled a small little bit of, like you said, a layer, not even a layer of what's in this book. So yeah, I mean, actually we didn't peel anything. We just talk about the general stuff basically. So
Well, cool, man. Well, check out the book. When you get into a little bit, we'll do another one.
yeah, absolutely.
More about the
Maybe
book.
when I read it, we can do another talk. So, but then I will have much more question probably, about it.
Gotcha. No problem.
Okay, so thank you so much. I mean, all of you who are watching, ladies and gentlemen, Steven Rosen. Thank you so much. Thank you, and see ya.
See you, pal.
Cheers.